All right, so Kobe's question was, how do you get the background out of an image that already exists, right? So the most important answer to that is that you have to take a good image of your model, right? And there's a reason that we use either a completely white or a completely black background, and that's because you get what should be a very monolithic background to work with, okay, like this. So everything that's black is black, right? And the shade of black that it is doesn't really spread more than a couple of color tolerance points, right? Like I showed you with the magic wand. So this is where you would use the color picker, just like I just showed you. So you go to select, you need to first select the color that you're trying to remove, yeah, which is black. And then we're going to go to select color range and see how versus the sky one, which showed us, like the blue sky, showed us a gradient across this thing. Now we're seeing something that is predominantly binary, black and white. So this is where skill and experience is really helpful because you can find a good balance. But the important part about this is you've got complications, right? Complications in the form that you have other black figures in here and you have translucent figures in here that you need to account for. So this is going to select everything that is black inside of my model, and I just need to go through and deselect it before I delete that background out. So anyway, let's go with something that's kind of, I think I want to pull it down just to a point where I reduce some of the shadows. Like what I'm looking at is this right here. Like see that? Like I can see in my model that that's the shadow. This spot right here is this shadow, and if I can reduce it just enough so that it doesn't trim out that shadow, then I'm going to bring, you know, a lot of the chances of deleting shadows sort of out of the picture. So let's pull it down to about there, I think, and I'll hit OK. So I can see that it selected a lot of the things that I want it to select and some of the things that I don't want it to select. So when I go to, let's say I use the Polygon selection tool, if you hold, I forget, is it Alt or Shift? Yeah, Alt. If you hold Alt, you can drag and sort of draw a polygon box around the elements that you want to deselect, meaning you don't want to get rid of those things. Okay, so see how I took those out of the selection? So they're going to stay black. The other thing is I'm not sure what that is, so I'm going to take that out. This I might need to custom modify later rather than letting the transparency take over, so I'm going to take that one off. And everything else I'll leave as it is and maybe mess with the out of focus fence in the background later. Okay, so that allows me to delete that stuff. Or if I wanted to, I can grab a sky. Let's go here and say landscape sky. Let's put it on a hillside because my camera's kind of looking down. So yeah, that'll work. Copy that image, paste that image, free transform. Wow, that's huge. This thing is massive. Yeah, this thing is so big. All right, there we go. Maybe something kind of like that. Right? So, I mean, the perspective isn't perfect, but that's the hardest part about all this is finding the right perspective. The reason I chose a house on a hillside is because my camera's looking down, and this camera perspective is kind of looking down, so it's going to give me a nice view through that window. So, anyway, so that's the gist of it. And of course, you're going to want to go through. You're probably going to want to go through and clean up some things, like the fact that this is like a really hard edge. You can soften that up. Like, let's try going back to this model. I'll select this, and I'm going to say select, modify, maybe expand it by a pixel. And I can trim that edge out a little bit. Makes it a little smoother. I mean, it's a sharper edge, obviously, but I can soften up that condition a little bit. Yeah.
I thought expand is not going outward, but inward.
Because what I had selected was everything out here. So the selection is the sky, not the building. So I expanded outward so that it would select 1 pixel into the building from the sky. And then I would delete everything from the sky's edge out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what questions do you have about that? Not too terribly difficult, right?
Where did they find the extra edge of pixels to add on to?
Sorry, what do you mean?
When you say expand, right, therefore they're adding more pixels
Yeah.
on the outer layer, right?
Yeah.
So where do they find the extra pixels?
Oh, well, let's look at it this way. So let me draw a circle. And I'm going to rasterize that circle. All right. So I'm going to resize this image to something that's really small. So let's make it like 150 pixels by 100 pixels. Okay. So when you zoom in on it, it's going to look like that, right? When I select this, it selects a specific pixel. So when you zoom in on it, see how that edge is actually squared off? So it's going to expand based off of that square. So select, modify, expand 1 pixel, and it's going to jump 1 pixel out.
It looks like offset.
Yeah, it is an offset. Select, modify, expand. Does that answer your question?
Not really.
I mean, it's just like offsetting. It's like
I know, but like the thing is, when you offset, here it's obviously simple, right? Because the outer layer is white. However, if you have like a colored background, how would they get the colored background to show like blend in, or with the extra pixels that they have?
They don't blend. So you're talking about feathering, not expanding. Because if I take this thing and I say select, modify, and I contract it by 3 pixels, right? It's going to go in, and if I delete that, it deletes everything specific to that pixel. Does that make sense? So quite literally, everything inside that selection is 100% cut out. What I think you're referring to is if I contract it, let's say I contract it by 5 more pixels, something like that, and then I say select, modify, and I feather it by 3 pixels. Okay, so that sort of creates this little blend of 3 square pixels out by 3 square pixels in. And then when I delete that, that's what I get. So it becomes more of a gradient operation across approximately 6 pixels. Does that make sense? Is that what you were referring to?
No, but I think I already have my answer.
Okay, so what was the answer you were looking for?
It was there's 2 layers, right? Obviously, if you're taking a pixel away from one layer, the pixel from behind that layer will pop up.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, that's was my answer.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. So if I didn't have this, then you would see that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Any other questions? Okay. Let's move on with the rendering stuff.